Self-awareness is a skill that most people get wrong. And even by virtue of hearing some of these tools and these approaches that are scientifically supported, you're ahead of the pack. And so in some sense, it doesn't really matter where you are right now, as long as you keep moving forward. And remember that dramatic, remarkable improvement in self-awareness that you want to achieve is going to happen little by little, day by day. You just keep chipping away. And before you know it, you too can be a self-awareness unicorn.
Are you a self-awareness unicorn? That rare person with exceptionally high internal and external self-awareness? Probably not. But according to self-awareness expert Dr. Tasha Eurich, just by learning some of the tools and approaches that you're going to hear about in the next 45 minutes, you're way ahead of the pack. One step closer to unicorn status. Let's do this.
Let's do this. Let's talk about talk.
Welcome to Talk About Talk podcast episode number 174. Boost your self-awareness with Dr. Tasha Eurich. I am so excited for you to meet Tasha. I first read her book called Insight a few years ago after it was recommended by Adam Grant. The full title of the book is Insight, the surprising truth about how others see us, how we see ourselves, and why the answers might matter more than we think. It immediately became one of my favorites, a book with research that I reference all the time, and a book that I often recommend to my coaching clients. So I was very excited to book this interview. When the time finally came and we logged into the interview, we both stopped and stared at the screen. I am sure my jaw dropped. Tasha was sitting in front of her beautiful horizontal bookcase, all sorted by color, like a beautiful rainbow of books, including the turquoise book jacket cover of her book Insight. Some of you might know that I am also obsessed with color, particularly turquoise. So there I was in front of my vertical bookshelf, each shelf coded by color. There's black, there's red, there's blue, there's yellow, and so on. Wow. Even if you're not obsessed with color, our screens were a sight to be seen. And you could say that we had an instant connection. Speaking of connection, in case we haven't met, my name is Dr. Andrea Wojnicki, and I'm your executive communication coach. Please, just call me Andrea. I coach ambitious executives like you to improve your communication skills so you can communicate with confidence, credibility, and clarity, and ultimately you can achieve your career goals. Sound good? To learn more about what I do, head over to talkabouttalk.com so you can read about the coaching and the workshops that I run. And there's lots of free resources there for you too. Just go to the bottom of the talkabouttalk.com homepage. And you can also sign up for my email newsletter where you can get free coaching from me in your inbox. Head over to talkabouttalk.com to sign up now. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. In this episode, you're going to learn a helpful definition of self-awareness, why it's important. We're also going to talk about some strategies that you can start immediately to help you become more self-aware. Let me introduce Tasha, then we'll get right into the interview. And at the end, as always, I'm going to summarize with 3 learnings that I want to reinforce for you. Sound good? Dr. Tasha Eurich is an organizational psychologist, researcher, and New York Times best-selling author who helps people thrive in a changing world. With a PhD in organizational psychology, Tasha is the principal of the Eurich Group, working with clients like Google, Walmart, and the NBA. She's been recognized as the world's top self-awareness coach and featured in Harvard Business Review, The Wall Street Journal, NBC, and more. Her 2017 TEDx talk has been viewed more than 8 million times. Her first book, Bankable Leadership, debuted as a New York Times bestseller. Her latest, Insight, explores the link between self-awareness and success. And that's where we're focusing here today. She also has another book coming out soon in 2025 focused on resilience, and that book is called Shatterproof. I'm going to leave links to all these books in the show notes. All right, here we go. Thank you so much, Tasha, for being here today on Talk About Talk to talk about our self-awareness.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Andrea.
So I guess we better start with definitions. When you are writing and researching and talking about self-awareness, what exactly do you mean?
So it's a great place to start, I think, and you're very smart to do that. It took our research team actually almost a year to scientifically and empirically define this critically important skill. So it's the will and the skill to understand who we are and how we're seen.
So I am familiar enough with your work that I know exactly what you mean by each of those very precise words, but I want to say I applaud and appreciate how precise you're being with that. So maybe break it down. What do you mean
Mhm.
by will and what do you mean by skill, first of all?
So both of those are equally important, right? If you're missing one, you can't become self-aware. The will has to do with not even necessarily a daily commitment because life, right? Life is crazy. Most days, if you are committed to seeing yourself clearly, that really kind of satisfies that piece of it. And then the skill is not just sort of using the myths and assumptions that we have about what it takes to become self-aware, but actually looking at scientifically supported actions that will improve our self-awareness. One of the things, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, that we discovered in our research was that a lot of really well-intentioned people are sort of approaching self-awareness in a way that's not giving them increased insight. And so that's where the skill component comes in. So it's not just, kind of throwing spaghetti at a wall and hoping something sticks. It's saying, this is my self-awareness strategy. This is how I'm going to break this down for myself.
When I was listening to and then reading your book, that's where I felt like I personally got a lot of traction as well,
Mm,
providing me with the frameworks for how to get input to your identity so that you can become more self-aware based on other people's input and other frameworks that we'll talk about. So let's go back to the definition though. The second part was
mhm.
about, I'm going to paraphrase here, but it's really about knowing yourself and also knowing how others perceive you. Is that another way
Exactly.
of saying it?
It is. And I think a lot of times when we think about self-awareness, we only consider that inner piece, right? Knowing who we are internally. What do we value? What are our passions? What are our personality patterns over time? Things like that. But we often neglect an equally important piece of the puzzle, which is to understand how other people see us. And what I always say to people is everybody has these shirts of like, other people's opinion of me is none of my business, right? While that's very empowering, and I'm sure it sells a lot of t-shirts, unless you work in a cardboard box and live in a cardboard box and never speak to another person again, it kind of matters how other people see you. And the angle that I've gotten to with, I've been coaching CEOs for more than 20 years now is they're already having these perceptions, right? They're already talking to other people about these perceptions. Wouldn't you rather know? Because when you know, you can decide what you want to do about it. It doesn't mean necessarily you have to change. But if we're not actively soliciting other people's perceptions of us, we are missing literally, one of the two camera angles of that skill. What's interesting in our research is that we found that very often highly self-aware people discover that those two data points don't always match up, right? I might see myself one way. There might be a perception of me that's very different. And I always go back there to the F. Scott Fitzgerald quote, which I really love. He says, the definition of true intelligence is being able to hold two opposing ideas in your mind and still retain the ability to function. Right. And
I
so
love that.
to become self-aware and to be on this journey, it's a dance really of soliciting both, navigating both, making sense of both, and sometimes believing and understanding that they won't square up, but you still have to have both of those data points.
Oh my goodness, Tasha, as you're talking, I'm thinking, oh, I need to ask her this. I need to ask her this. I need to ask her. There's so many directions we could go. Let me start with a quick anecdote that when I was reading your book the first time, I happened to be coaching a gentleman who I now realize was not self-aware, but I asked him whether he thought he was self-aware. And he said, I think I'm extremely self-aware.
Of course.
And when I was reading your book and thinking about it after, I thought, I know based on your research and others, there's what you call, or we call internal self-awareness and external self-awareness. And I thought instantly, he's high internally self-aware, but not externally self-aware. And in your book, you talk about how most of us think we are more self-aware than the average, right?
Including me, by the way.
Yeah.
Fun discovery.
Yeah. Everybody is everybody, right?
Yeah.
So I have a hypothesis, and maybe this is, easily apparent to you, but I'd love to hear your take on it, that a lot of people are very introspective,
Mhm.
and therefore they think that they are highly self-aware. So in your 2x2, where you have the seekers, the aware, the pleasers, and the introspectors, if you had to put the population, maybe of working professionals into this 2x2 matrix, the introspectors would get more than its fair share of folks.
Hmm. I'm not sure. It's interesting because I actually have the data. I could look at that. We have our insight quiz. Maybe we can put a link in your show notes for your
Yeah, that would be
listeners.
great.
But we've been doing this insight quiz and making it available to people for free for like more than 5 years now. So we could run those stats. I just don't want to speak out of the wrong side of my mouth, right? It's been a while, but the last time we did it, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, maybe, we were seeing very few people are high in both, right? That internal self-awareness, the first part of the definition, knowing who we are, and then the second part of it, understanding how other people see us. That's hard to achieve, right? But it is possible and very learnable. It's just that, again, most people are approaching it with good intentions, but bad tools, right? The seeker category is people who are just starting their journey in both of those categories, right? They're just starting to learn kind of who they are, what they want, what matters to them. And maybe they haven't gotten a lot of feedback in their life and they're really trying to start that journey. What I always tell seekers, if you feel like you might be in that category for anyone, is pick one to start with. Don't try to boil the ocean. Say, do I want to kind of get in touch with myself more? Do I want to understand how other people see me more? And then you can always add things after that. But to your question, where it gets really interesting is when people are high on one and then low on the other.
Right.
And this happens because those two types of self-knowledge are totally independent. Just because it's like the executive you were coaching, just because he saw himself clearly doesn't automatically translate to him understanding how other people saw him. And then the reverse is true. The category I fall in, I call pleasers. And these are people who are so focused on knowing how other people see them that sometimes they forget or they aren't even in touch with the choices that they can make in their own best interest. The example that I give about this, it's kind of a silly one, but a couple of years ago, I couldn't decide what color car to get. I was renewing my lease. I was traveling. I was super busy. So I texted like my 5 best friends and I said, here are the choices. Which one should I pick? Right. It's like this completely other focused view, which can have its advantages, but it can also have really big disadvantages. In that case,
Interesting.
what car did I want? What would
Yeah.
make me happy? But
You're
going
the
back
one
to
that's
your,
going to be driving it every day,
yeah,
Tasha, right?
exactly. They're probably not going to be in it very often. And but to your point, there is a pretty wide variety across those three categories. So
Mhm.
I would argue that even somebody who says they're self-aware may not be internally self-aware at all, right? If they say they're self-aware and you look at them and you're like, well, buddy, I'm not sure you understand, that probably means they're low in external self-awareness. But what our research has shown is that regardless of where you fall on that spectrum, 95% of us believe that we are self-aware. And the real number, according to, several different studies that we've done, is about 10 to 15% of us, right? So if 10 to 15% of us meet those criteria, 95% of us think we're self-aware. What that means is that on a good day, 80% of us are lying to ourselves about whether we're lying to ourselves. So
Wow.
that's the
So,
question I ask about your client, right? It's like, I don't know.
yeah, it's like our default should be to believe that we probably are not self-aware, or at least not as self-aware as we could be.
Bingo. I
Yeah.
always say, I put the word gently in front of that. Gently stop assuming that you're self-aware.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want any of your listeners to get the wrong idea about this. I am not here as like a poster child of self-loathing or, self-consciousness or neuroses. That isn't what self-awareness is at all.
Mhm.
But I think you're exactly right. There's this paradox that as soon as we stop assuming that we are self-aware, we can actually become that. Another way to look at it is as long as you're making forward progress, that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Uh, That's very inspiring. So I want to get into some of the tactics that you recommend. I know there's
Mhm.
the what versus why recommendation. But before we get into that, I just want to touch on something that you said that also is related to something in your book about folks that are like the senior leaders and the most powerful people. When you're talking about the pleasers, it reminds me of some of the conversations that I have in workshops and coaching with my clients when we're talking about their personal brand. And one of the most important strategic principles, I believe, of establishing a strong personal brand is to focus on what makes you unique. Because
Mm,
if you're thinking and focused on your unique strengths and passions, you're going to end up being as happy or satisfied as you can be and as successful as you can be. So when I'm thinking about this 2 by 2 matrix, I feel like it might be okay to be a pleaser early in your career, but then at some point you have to focus on what you want to be and what you are so that you can evolve. And this is what I say, like it's fine early in your career to look around and copy people because you're trying different identities, right? But
mm,
as soon as you're mid-career, and definitely when you're a senior executive, you need to double down on what makes you unique, right?
mm.
So maybe that's when being a pleaser can really backfire on you. It happens because we're social learners. We look around at other people that are successful and we copy them. I guess the question is, do you think there might be kind of a similar insight here about self-awareness as there is about personal branding, where it's okay to be less focused early in your career because you're experimenting, but then when you hit mid-career and definitely senior levels, you really need to double down on your unique personal brand and on your self-awareness.
I think I partially agree with that.
Okay.
But I would also come back to, let me tell you a little bit about the sample of people that we really studied most exhaustively. And you know this, we called them our self-awareness unicorns.
The
And these are
unicorns.
people, yeah, that didn't start out as self-aware, but through some like mysterious process that we wanted to uncover, were able to become dramatically more self-aware and in
Okay.
fact, highly self-aware. And what was so interesting to me is that there weren't any patterns in that sample based on any demographic, including age.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking about, one person, Kelsey, who is a middle school science teacher, who was very, very early in his career. But even earlier in his career, he had been an engineer and was absolutely miserable. And so he went on this journey of self-awareness and said, you know what I really want to do is I really want to be a public school teacher and I want to teach science to kids. And so from my perspective, I think we miss something really for every year we're not on this journey. We could be, depending on whether it's internal or external self-awareness. If we're missing internal self-awareness, we'll be like somebody who, is maybe not choosing a career that makes them happy. And for every year that goes by without having external self-awareness, we could be alienating everyone, right? Who knows
Yeah.
what impact we're having if we don't know and can't control it.
Yeah.
So I see what you're saying, and I think you're right. I think in some sense, self-awareness becomes more important the higher up you rise because it's more rare. But I would also just encourage anybody, like wherever you are on this journey, wherever you are in your career, it will put you above the pack. If you use some of these tools and really use what's scientifically supported, it's a superpower. There's no better way I can say it.
I absolutely agree. I've been telling people lately, I used to say a growth mindset was the superpower that would build your success in your communication skills and then in your career. But I actually think it's a combination of
Mm.
a growth mindset and self-awareness. In your definition of self-awareness, though, there is the growth mindset because it's the will, right? Yeah.
We just
Yeah.
put everything in there just
Yeah.
just to
Yeah.
make sure.
So my next question is related to what you were just saying about as you get more senior in your career, it becomes more important. So in many things that I've read that you've written and interviews that I've listened to, you list the many, many benefits of self-awareness. Why don't you just list some of them right now?
I love this question. So we could be here forever, but I'll kind of focus it to your audience specifically. So people who are self-aware are more successful at work. They get more promotions. They're better communicators. They're better influencers. I know, right? Pick your favorite. They're more confident. They're more empathetic. They're more effective and respected leaders. And there's even some evidence that's been starting to emerge over the past 10 or so years that in companies with high numbers of self-aware, employees and leaders,
Mhm.
those companies are actually more profitable.
Amazing.
So a lot of executives might think like, oh, I'm a very busy person and, I don't have time to work on my self-awareness. But what I would say is, you are modeling this behavior for the entire organization. And an
Right.
organization can only be as self-aware as the person at the top or the
Right.
team at the top or the senior
Right.
team, right? But wait, there's more. This is where I'm like the knife salesman person, right? Or the infomercial. But wait, there's more. So self-awareness also benefits us in our personal lives. There are a ton of examples, but I think kind of most universal is that people who are self-aware have better romantic relationships. They have stronger and deeper friendships. And this might be especially interesting for some of your listeners. They tend to raise more mature and less narcissistic children.
Oh, wow. Woo.
Right? So, like, pick your poison. The beauty of this, and this is why I call self-awareness the meta skill of the 21st century, is that it is literally the foundation of everything else that you're accomplishing in your life. You can only be as influential as you are self-aware. You can only be as good of a communicator as you are self-aware, right? You can only be as authentic as you are self-aware. And so that's where, I think if you choose to work on the skill, the ripple effects are astonishing.
Okay. Well, you've got me convinced, Tasha, easily. Easily. When you say communication skills, I light up, as you could see.
Hmm.
So before we move on to the tactics for how people can work on developing their self-awareness, I just want to ask you this question that occurred to me a couple of days ago. So on the one hand, there's this research that one of the things you said was more effective, and it was effective and something leadership, more effective and
Effective and respected. Hmm.
respected leaders. But I think you said there's also an inverse correlation between power and self-awareness. So how do you reconcile that? Because presumably these leaders have power.
Right. So the way I would reconcile that is that some leaders figure it out and benefit, right? So just because it's rare at the top ranks of a company doesn't mean it's not immensely powerful. And in fact, I would argue that makes it more powerful. We all probably start at a similar level of self-awareness, but what happens is when you're the boss, suddenly you walk in and like nobody's giving you bad news. Everybody's laughing at all of your jokes, right? Nobody's bringing you problems before the problem becomes a big problem. And that's just the nature of hierarchy and power. There's a lot of other examples too of many leaders, especially senior leaders that I'm sure we both worked with, make assumptions. And the assumption is something like, well, I must be doing something right. I'm the CFO, right? I must be doing something right. I'm an SVP. And that is often true, but the success criteria change, we change, the environment changes.
Mhm.
So we can't ever say, I'm good, right? I've arrived. And I think, again, with each successive level of leadership, fewer and fewer people are comfortable telling us the truth. So
Right.
that's how I would square that. It's empirically important at high levels, but it's even more important because it's so rare.
Not necessarily because of something that you did differently. It's because of other people treating you differently. And then if you have similar beliefs about what feedback is, yeah, I get it. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Please share with us a couple of your favorite frameworks, if you want to call them that, or tactics for helping us improve our self-awareness.
Sure. So let me give you two. And I think in some ways, these are the like simplest and most practical. And I use these a lot with my coaching clients. So one is for internal self-awareness and the other is for external
Awesome.
self-awareness. So internal self-awareness, we found that those self-awareness unicorns, almost to a person, each had some kind of daily practice. It was very quick. And again, if they didn't do it every day, they didn't beat themselves up. They just tried to do it most days, where they were reflecting on their day, but not in a way that kicked them down something I call the rabbit hole of rumination, right? And the danger of sort of overanalyzing ourselves and our experiences is that we actually lose insight and it makes us worse off. It makes us more stressed, more anxious, more
Yeah.
depressed. And that's probably a whole other podcast that we can do.
Yeah.
But for the purposes of this, The daily check-in process, I would offer 3 questions. So think about this like the next time you're brushing your teeth at night, or the next time you're driving home from work. Ask yourself some variation of number 1, what went well today? Number 2, what didn't go so well? And then 3, how can I be smarter tomorrow? And by the way, if you're working on something different, if you're working on something specific, you could even say, how can I be more empathetic tomorrow? How can I be more influential tomorrow? How can I be a better coach tomorrow? Right. But I think smarter is a nice catch-all of
Yeah.
how can I use what I learned today to be 0.1% more self-aware tomorrow?
Mm.
And what's really interesting about the journey of self-awareness that we've discovered is most of the time, improvement doesn't happen in really dramatic leaps and bounds. It happens slowly, incrementally every day.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love about that, for both types of self-awareness is it makes it accessible. It's like, oh, you mean if I just try to ask those questions, you know, 5 or 6 times a week, like I'll be making progress? Yes.
Yeah.
And if you're not making progress, maybe it's time to turn to external self-awareness, which is
Right.
maybe what I'll give you for the second tool. This is actually not something that I identified. It was something that I named. I call it the dinner of truth, but it was developed by a communications professor named Josh Meisner. And Dr. Meisner has been doing this exercise with all of his students for many, many years. I would guess
Okay.
he's probably in, at least the thousands, if not the 10,000s. Here's what it entails. So first you identify someone, it could be a work colleague, it could be someone in your personal life with whom you want to improve your relationship, right? Then you take them out to coffee, lunch. I like dinner because you can have cocktails and one cocktail can make this a little bit easier if that's something that you're into. And then you sit them down and you kind of explain, I'm trying to improve my self-awareness. You're someone that's very important to me. I have a question I'd like to ask you to answer as honestly as you can. And the question is, what do I do that is most annoying to you? Everybody's stomachs collectively dropped upon hearing that question. That is a hardwired human response. We're very scared of possibly discovering that people don't think we're as great as we think we are, right? But what I've found, and by the way, I would never ask anyone else to do an exercise like this unless I had done it multiple times.
Yeah.
And what I've discovered is not only is it always a positive experience, I come out with like something very actionable that I can focus on. So instead of an indictment of who I am, I always worry that my friends would be like, Tasha, I'm really glad you asked because everything you do annoys me. And I don't really like you that much. And I don't want to be, but that's the fear, right? And I know it was, at the time I even knew it was irrational, but you're afraid of it. But like one of my friends, said, I love you in person, but you really annoy me on social media. And I was like, thank you. That's so actionable, right? And
Yeah.
I actually this was like 10 years ago, I completely changed how I was showing up in that sort of virtual space. And so I would encourage people as scary as it sounds or as scared as you might be,
Yeah.
give it a try. Just try it once and
Yeah.
see what happens.
So I guess the criteria, who would you ask? It would be someone who, probably 3 things. They know you well enough.
Mm-hmm.
They like you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you want it to be a positive experience, even though they're identifying the quote unquote negative thing. And you need to trust them. So maybe have witnessed them telling truths in other contexts where it might not have been comfortable, something like that, right?
That's a perfect list. Yeah, I think everybody should go off of that. That's exactly right.
Oh, the power of three, the power of three
Yeah.
things.
But I think the
So,
third piece is something that we miss sometimes is we're like, oh, we love each other and everything's great but they might not be willing or able to share that truth with you. And
mhm,
sometimes you don't know until you ask and then you just say, that's okay. Thank you very much. Like, let's have a nice dinner now. But I think if you're a little more strategic about it than that, if you say, has this person maybe been the brave soul who says the thing that nobody wants to say, like in at least one context that I can remember. That's a pretty good sign.
yeah. I've gotten in the habit, I'm thinking now as I'm speaking with you, Tasha, probably based on my reading of your book and listening to you. I've gotten in the habit after I'm done with coaching sessions and with workshops of immediately asking for feedback and making it
Mm,
really clear to people that I truly believe feedback is a gift, right? Because I'm in this environment where I'm coaching people. And if I don't ask for feedback, unless I did a really bad job, which doesn't happen, but if I did a really bad job, I'm sure they would let me know. But they're always like,
mhm,
oh, it was great. You got 9 out of 10, la, 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 whatever. I'm like, tell me something I can do to improve next time. And
mhm.
most of the time they don't share anything. They're like, no, everything was great. Is there something you can say to people that encourages them to share feedback with you that you've come across?
Yeah. I mean, let's take that situation specifically because I think it's something very generalizable, right? We all can ask for immediate feedback. And so how can we get that feedback and have the best chance it'll be helpful? I might even so two ideas there. One would be to share with them past feedback you've gotten. You could say, gosh, I remember 5 years ago, I was giving this workshop and a gentleman, came up to me during lunch and said, we don't have enough breaks and we just don't have the mental space to think about everything we're learning. And it was so incredibly helpful. And here's how I changed the class. Like maybe you can give a couple of examples of that. If it's the first time you've asked for feedback on something and you don't have, a past track record, I would just make some stuff up. Like, or even say the things that you're worried aren't working, right? Like,
Oh,
I felt like my energy was down a little bit this afternoon. And, maybe that's in my head, but maybe you can verify that for me. That's a hypothesis I have that I can't test without you telling me what you think. So to kind of give them, like, I'm not just saying this, I'm actually going to give you examples and show you how excited I am about hearing feedback on those examples. I think that might do a lot. It's obviously just one thing you can do, but I think that's worth trying.
definitely worth trying. I'm going to try it and I'll let you know how it works. I
Okay.
can't imagine it wouldn't work, right? It's like you're setting the table for the feedback.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay. So I can imagine some people are hesitant, is a nice way of putting it, to
Hmm.
ask for feedback, to gain insight into particularly their external self-awareness, right? And what their identity is in the eyes of other people. So this leads me to your upcoming book called Shatterproof. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about in that book?
So I have to preface this by saying that the book just went to copy editing, and I am not yet as smart in talking about it as I know that I need to be. But I'm just going to give you like some headlines. I worked on Shatterproof for 5 years, and it started out as an exploration of, when bad things happen to us, what are the best ways that we can respond so that we're not just sort of getting back to where we were before, but we're getting, smarter, more confident, stronger, more ready for, whatever challenges lie ahead. But during this research, COVID happened, as we all remember, and I experienced something that I had never experienced in my life. I just recently learned I'm not a fourth generation entrepreneur, I'm a fifth generation entrepreneur. And I have been raised, I was raised by a single mother, taught that when you fall down, you get back up again. You're resilient, you're tough, you persevere. And, I've had lots of challenges in my life, like we all have. For me, the biggest one has been a lot of like pretty significant health challenges. But up until COVID happened, I had always found a way to kind of push through them, to endure, quiet endurance, right? Where I wasn't complaining. I was getting up every day. And for the longest time, I assumed that everyone else was in 10 out of 10 pain every day and they just didn't complain about it as much as I did. So then I was like, I have to complain less. But what happened during COVID was literally, and I can trace the day that this happened. I woke up one day and my resilience ran out.
Ooh.
I hit my resilience ceiling where my coping tools that I had relied on for my whole life were not only not working, but they were feeling like extra stress. Things like exercising or meditating or my gratitude journal, right? All the things we're taught will help us be resilient. My tank was completely empty. And so that actually kind of kicked me down into this hole of looking at what does the research on resilience actually tell us and what's the alternative, right? And so the best way to think about becoming shatterproof is a second skill set in addition to resilience. It's not that resilience isn't helpful, it's that it has its limits. So becoming shatterproof is about, instead of bouncing back, which is what resilience is, when we become shatterproof, we are proactively growing forward through our toughest challenges. So instead of waiting for something to be over and just trying to keep persevering, we're actually saying, this is an opportunity for a profound personal transformation. In order to do that, I need to understand what my pain is telling me. I need to kind of understand the self-limiting patterns and behaviors and beliefs that I'm bringing to the table. I need to pick new ones. So the book is really about this 4-step framework to become shatterproof that we can use all the time, first of all, but specifically when our resilience is starting to run out. I never want anyone to experience what I experienced. And it was about March or April of 2021. And so the book is really to help people. My publisher didn't like this title, but the goal is to help people build a more beautiful life in a world of constant chaos. Instead of just bouncing back, like, why can't we have a beautiful life? Don't we all deserve that?
Yes, it sounds incredibly empowering. I can't wait to read it and interview you about it when that happens.
I will be less
You're reminding
blathery,
me
I
of
promise.
during the Olympics, watching, my heart was breaking for I was watching the gymnastics and people, they're falling off equipment or whatever. And some of them, it was like not the first time that day where they had just like something's happening, right? And I was watching with my mom and I said, well, they've got a TED Talk.
That's
They've now
awesome.
hit rock bottom in front of millions of
Right.
people. They've got a
Billions,
story
I
to
think, right?
tell.
Isn't that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on to the 3 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, first question. Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Big time introvert.
Really?
Mhm. I'm a gregarious introvert. That's the
Okay,
qualifier.
okay. What are your communication pet peeves?
There's only one at the top of the list, and it's lying.
Mm, Dishonesty. Okay.
Mhm.
Question number 3, is there a book or a podcast that you find yourself recommending a lot lately? By the way, I recommend your book all the
Oh.
time.
Well, I and
So
Penguin Random House, thank you, Andrea, for
yeah,
that. That's very nice of you. The book that I find I'm recommending most often lately is by my really dear friend Laura Gassner Otting. She has written 2 books, but her most recent one is called Wonder Hell. And it's about what happens when we start to achieve our greatest potential and how it's not all it's cracked up to be. It gets into things like imposter syndrome and all the things that come along with success when we thought success would be easy and we actually discover that it's hard. And it's very clever. She's like the best friend that's going to kick your ass and tell you exactly what you need to do, but in a way that is so kind and warm. And she's also very, very funny. It's a delightful book.
oh, I can't wait to read it. I can't wait. Based on the fact that we're both interested in, I guess, self-identity and self-awareness, and
Mhm.
based on the fact that we arrange our bookshelves similarly, I'm going to maybe make the hypothesis that we might also enjoy reading the same books. So I can't
Oh,
wait to
yeah.
read that book. Is there anything else you want to say, you want to share with the Talk About Talk listeners about self-awareness?
I mean, I would just say, let me give them 2 things. Number one, I would encourage everybody listening to this to go take the 5-minute insight quiz. You can get it at www.insight-quiz.com. It again takes 5 minutes. It's free. You fill out 14 questions. You send it to someone else who knows you well. They fill out 14 questions, very important. And then when both results are in, you get a nice report that shows you high level, which of those 4 boxes are you in right now? And then it gives you, usually 2 or 3 very practical things you can do if you decide you want to improve. So I think that's the first thing. But the second thing, I'll go back to kind of a theme that I think we've touched on multiple times, which is self-awareness is a skill that most people get wrong. And even by virtue of hearing some of these tools and these approaches that are scientifically supported, you're ahead of the pack. And so in some sense, it doesn't really matter where you are right now, as long as you keep moving forward. And remember that dramatic, remarkable improvement in self-awareness that you want to achieve is going to happen little by little, day by day. You just keep chipping away. And before you know it, you too can be a self-awareness unicorn.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tasha. I really appreciate your time and your expertise, and it's really nice to get to know you.
You too. I really enjoyed this. Yeah, two self-identity, self-development bookshelf nerds. We had to come together at some point. So it was a pleasure.
I love it. Thank you. Thanks again to Tasha for sharing her insights about self-awareness. Yeah, I got that. Her book is called Insight, and she's insightful. Of course. Okay, let me now highlight 3 of the insights from our conversation that I want to reinforce with you. 1, why self-awareness is important. 2, the definition of self-awareness and a model for how we can think about it. And last, 3, suggestions for how to boost our self-awareness. Okay, first, the significance of self-awareness, the impact that it has. According to Tasha's research and the research of others, those with higher self-awareness benefit in many, many ways. This is a long list. Are you ready? So people who are self-aware are more successful at work, they get more promotions, they're better communicators, they're better influencers, they're more confident, they're more empathetic, they're more effective and respected in their leadership positions, and the companies that they lead might even be more profitable. Personally, they have better romantic relationships, and they have stronger and deeper friendships. And they tend to raise more mature and less narcissistic children. As Tasha says, self-awareness is the meta skill of the 21st century. Okay, that's the first point. Don't underestimate the significance of self-awareness. The second point that I want to reinforce is the definition of self-awareness. This is thinking about self-awareness in a more disciplined way, beyond the popular definition, which is thinking about your own thinking. Tasha's definition is the will and the skill to understand who we are and how we're seen. There are 4 components of this definition. First, the will, the desire to improve. If that list that I just gave you of the many benefits of self-awareness doesn't improve your will to improve it, then I don't know what to say. The second component of this definition is the skill, the knowledge about how you become more self-aware, beyond the myths and common knowledge. The third component is who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses, your passions, values, opinions, idiosyncrasies, all of it. This is internal self-awareness. The fourth and last component is how you're seen by others, how others perceive you. This is external self-awareness. As Tasha mentioned, it might be helpful for you to think about these last 2 dimensions, internal and external self-awareness, in terms of a 2x2. I always love a great 2x2. So there's low and high internal self-awareness on one axis, and then there's low and high external self-awareness on the other axis. The rare folks who are high on both are what she calls the unicorns. If you're low on both, you're called a seeker. You don't yet know who you are, what you stand for, or even how others see you. And you probably feel stuck or frustrated with your performance and your relationships. Most of us are somewhere on the diagonal, I'm guessing. There are the introspectors, those with high internal and low external self-awareness. I have to say, I've worked with some clients who are definitely introspectors. They're clear on who they are, but they don't challenge their own views or search for blind spots by getting feedback from others. They end up in trouble. And then on the other diagonal, there's the pleasers. You can guess who these are, right? These people have low internal and high external self-awareness. Tasha admitted that she might be a pleaser. And I have to say, I think I might be too. So we're focused on appearing a certain way to others, but we could be overlooking what matters to us. The last point I want to reinforce is Tasha's suggestion for how to become a unicorn, how to improve your internal and your external self-awareness. She has 2 suggestions. The first is the daily check-in process. Here's where you answer 3 questions. It could be just in your head, or you might write this down in a journal. The 3 questions are this. Number 1, what went well today? Number 2, what didn't go so well? And number 3, how can I be smarter or better tomorrow? This will improve your self-awareness. The idea here is that improvement in your self-awareness doesn't happen quickly. Rather, it happens slowly, incrementally, a little bit every day. So that's the first suggestion. The second suggestion or tactic for how to improve your self-awareness is what she calls the dinner of truth. The dinner of truth was developed by communications professor Josh Meisner. What you do is you identify someone with whom you want to improve your relationship. It could be a friend, a colleague, a family member, or maybe you try it with a bunch of people. Is you take them out for coffee or lunch or dinner or maybe cocktails as she suggests. That might make it a little easier. And what you do is you ask them a very awkward but clear question and ask them to answer as honestly as they can. The question is, what do I do that is most annoying to you? Can you imagine the answers? You know what? I'm going to start doing this, and I'm not going to wait for some fancy dinner reservation. I'm just going to go ask my coworkers, my friends, and my family, what is it that I do that annoys you? Actually, I already know what annoys my family because they tell me all the time, but I'm not sure what my friends and my coworkers are going to say. Well, that's it. The 3 things that I wanted to reinforce you are the significance of self-awareness, first, and second, the definition of self-awareness, particularly the helpful 2x2 with low and high internal and external self-awareness. And last, I wanted to share with you 2 ways to boost your self-awareness. Do you remember what they were? The first is to ask yourself the 3 questions. What went well today? What didn't go so well? And how can I do better tomorrow? And then, of course, there's the dinner of truth. Thanks again to Tasha. Tasha, I can't wait to read your next book called Shatterproof and to interview you again. You can connect with Tasha through her coordinates in the show notes. And by the way, my coordinates are there too. Please connect with me anytime. Check out the talkabouttalk.com website or send me a DM on LinkedIn. I love hearing from you. Thanks for listening and talk soon.